All right, 4:30 Tuesday afternoon. Welcome to Weather Impact Live. And Tuesdays we talk tropics, and we are so lucky to have Dr. Rick Knabb from the Weather Channel, their tropical weather expert, and led the Hurricane Center. What was that, 2012 through 17, I think, Dr. Knabb?
Yeah, that's when I was the director down there, but I was also a forecaster there back in the 01 to 08 time frame, and spent some time out in Hawaii. So, about almost 15 years with the Weather Service.
Well, we're very fortunate to have you here, and especially today, we actually have, looks like something possibly developing, at least in the Atlantic. But as we were talking last week, the Pacific has been showing all of the action. You can see your map there. It is kind of lopsided there.
Yeah, the El Nino continues to get stronger and stronger. It's really become the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere, causing the upward motion over the central and eastern Pacific, and then the wind shear and the more sinking motion on the Atlantic side. And yesterday on our Weather Unfiltered show last night, we spent some time talking about Andrew because, number one, it was the date of the landfall in South Florida as a Cat 5. But we brought up another thing about Andrew that really I think we can still learn from today, even as we're talking about that tropical wave out in the eastern Atlantic, because Andrew did not go through the Caribbean. And in an El Nino year, a strong El Nino year like this, we're not likely to get those Caribbean freight trains, those storms that go all the way through the Caribbean, then come up toward the Gulf or the East Coast that way. Andrew went around the Caribbean, like the storms that we get this year are probably going to have to do. They're going to have to form in the northern Caribbean and come toward us on our doorstep, but they're going to have to go around. And Andrew did that, so it was sneaky that way. And also, it looked like it was going to fall apart out over the central subtropical Atlantic. It was almost sheared apart as a tropical storm, and then in just a few short days, it rapidly intensified. So in a year like 92, that was overall way below average, and with a storm that didn't look like it was going to make it, it's a reminder to us all that storms can sneak up on us if we're not paying attention, and then all it takes is one, like this. 1992 was all about one storm, right? Otherwise way below average. I'm not saying, Bobby, that this tropical wave is going to become an Andrew, right. But it is a reminder that we can't ignore these things and shrug off a strong El Nino year or a wave that we don't think is going to make it across, because once it gets into the central Atlantic, depending upon how far north it is, which will depend on how strong and tall it is, then it will have even more fuel to tap into. And if it stays out of the Caribbean, maybe it can find, I don't want this to happen, of course, but it might be able to find weak enough wind shear to survive. So there's the Caribbean wall of shear right now. That is a very strong El Nino year kind of signal. But then we have these upper level troughs in the central subtropical Atlantic. Those are common, they come and go, and that's one of the features that this wave is going to have to navigate through, and that might determine its long-term chances. But in the short term, it's got pretty weak wind shear out here in the eastern tropical Atlantic. So for the 2-day probabilities, the Hurricane Center is giving it a 7 out of 10 shot. But then they're pointing out that the farther west it goes, either it tries to go into the Caribbean, or if it runs into some sheer northeast of the Caribbean, which it may or may not, then its long-term chances might be a little bit less. So, Bobby, I feel like this is like 2 weeks ago when we were talking about those waves that were out there, and the Hurricane Center was giving them 60, 70% right. chances. And I think it's the same sort of thing. I think the chances are not guaranteed, but pretty good that it develops in the next couple of days. But its longer-term prospects are a little more dicey.
Yeah, and last week we were talking about that shear. We hope and we think it stays over the Caribbean, but as you mentioned, that upper trough, that wall of shear kind of running the gauntlet there, that will come and go. But, you know, when you showed the track of Andrew, that's what it kind of did. It was almost recurving. It looks like it got sheared. And then we were talking last week, weaker wester. Once it gets weaker, it tends to go further to the west, and then it got over that ocean heat content off the southeast coast and east of the Bahamas. So kind of eerie that it's there. We're not seeing a lot of that suggested in the forecast models at this point, are we?
No, we're not. But it is one of those things that when you've got something that's this many days away from any potential direct or indirect impacts on the east coast of the U.S., you have to realize there are so many different things that can happen, not just dependent upon what the steering is in the atmosphere and where the troughs and where the shear is, but also on the character of the system itself. Because, as you say, weaker, it would be farther to the west. So if this fails to develop in the next couple of days, it could end up being bad news because it could make its way farther west and then develop on our doorstep. That's always a possibility. And if it develops sooner, then it might turn sooner. Right. And I also wanted to point out, too, that if it were to develop in the next couple of days, then we got to start talking about the timing of the tropical system relative to troughs over Canada, because these are going this way, the tropical system's going this way, and if they line up, then that can be its exit stage right to the north. And I wanted to show at least one of the models. Here's the Euro model and the colors of the low-level spin. And it shows it getting its act together pretty well over the next couple of days. Upper level, high pressure, weak wind shear. But then here's that subtropical mid-oceanic trough that we often see in the Atlantic in any kind of year. That's the shear it has to kind of navigate around. And last night's Euro model took it this way, developing it sooner. But this run is just another possibility, just like last night is a possibility. It runs into this mid-oceanic trough, and that shear kind of prevents it from developing, so it stays weaker, it stays shallower, so it goes with the low-level flow. But you can also see to the north, if it were to strengthen, there's a weakness in the ridge in here if this trough from Canada is timed just so. But if that doesn't give it a ride out of town and it stays weak and goes along this path, could it possibly try to regenerate farther down the road? That's at least one possibility. So the models are not giving us every possible scenario here, but they give us some clues as to what's working for this and what's working against it.
So I want to show the forecast models for this. This is 96L is what this is designated as. And I've only taken it out 5 to 7 days here because kind of here, that's what we really talk about. Anything beyond 7 days, even 7 days is, as you just mentioned, is really hard to forecast for tropical systems. But you don't want to be looking out further, although the models will go out a lot further than that. But you can see the spread. Some of the models want to do the early curve to the north versus some of the weaker models would have it come further to the west, just north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. What would be your message to folks at home when they see, because you know they love to see the spaghetti plots, right? They pick out the line that comes closest to their house and they say, I got a feeling about that one. What would be your advice to folks at home that are seeing these and what should they be thinking about?
Well, and this advice applies to yourself and to anybody else you talk to about this system. Nobody knows for sure that this is going to miss the U.S. and never get here. Okay, so if anybody is telling you that, well, it's a strong El Nino year and look at all those models curving out to sea or showing it falling apart, this is nothing to worry about. Ignore those voices because it's not true. We don't know that for a fact. Now, there are a lot of scenarios which take it somewhere else than where you live, including that it doesn't develop. But there are so many possibilities. Now, you showed some of those that are curving out in the middle of the Atlantic. Those were all those GFS or U.S. global model-based model tracks. And I wanted to show what that looks like in the model fields and maybe why it's doing what it's doing. And this is the GFS. And basically, the reason why it curves it into the middle of the Atlantic is because it develops a stronger system sooner over the tropical Atlantic over the next 2 to 3 days. So you see all that spin, and it also has an upper level trough that doesn't start to interact with it until it has become a stronger, taller system. So instead of being steered with the low level flow in the trade wind flow, it gets picked up by the subtropical flow. And now look at, here's a ridge, and here's that Canadian trough that provides the opening in the subtropical ridge to allow this to go north. But it's only going to do that if it's strong and tall enough. So it's another example of, weaker farther west, stronger, going to the north and recurving a little sooner. But when you kind of put it all together with the Google DeepMind model options, they tend to lean toward either something weaker or something in between. And I don't think this modeling system necessarily has a grasp of factoring in how strong and tall the system is. It's mostly a general pattern matching kind of, system that shows you what direction, a low would go. But it shows generally, I think, weaker systems going in this direction. But if there's anything left of it and it stays north of the Caribbean, we always have to watch for the possibility that it develops on our doorstep. So some of those tracks, several of them that you showed that go just north of the Caribbean, they might have a chance, even though they're weaker when they're going through that zone over the next week, then that could leave the system in a place where it could develop on our doorstep, and that's always a concern to me. So if it doesn't develop in the next few days, ironically, that could possibly end up being bad news for the U.S. if it then develops later down the road.
And that in-close development, it limits time for warning and getting the word out. One thing we also do say is in these moments, I mean, there's nothing right now to directly worry about, just something to watch. But it is important to make sure you keep checking in. You can't watch a forecast on Tuesday and then get to Friday and be like, well, no, you said it was going to do this, because the Google DeepMind you just showed, those have shifted a little further to the west in just the last 24 hours.
Yeah, and the European modeling system has a variety of solutions. And you don't just look at the latest models runs. The last night Euro had a stronger system curving like the GFS. Today's Euro has a weaker system going farther west but north of the Caribbean. And that is a scenario which could imply maybe down the road it develops on our doorstep. So the message that I want people to be repeating to their friends is, we don't know yet, and we can't ignore this one. And even in a strong El Nino year, we can get strong hurricanes to develop. So I keep showing these composites of the most recent 4 strong El Nino years for August and September to make the point that even if the Caribbean isn't busy, now it doesn't have to be in August. What if it happens in September? But 3 years ago in August, Idalia did what I was just describing as a concern. It didn't develop or move through the Caribbean. It formed on the edges of the Caribbean and formed on our doorstep, and within just a few short days, we had a major hurricane making landfall in the U.S. And other August systems have become storms out here where this wave is trying to develop, and they become hurricanes or major hurricanes in this zone, some of them between Bermuda and the continental U.S. And you look at some of the September tracks, a lot of them became hurricanes and major hurricanes in that western Atlantic. And who's to say, with these are only 4 years as examples, that something couldn't go farther west and then go toward the East Coast. So the point there is that even if the Caribbean is not where systems are developing and strengthening, and even if it's a strong El Nino year, that doesn't cancel the rest of hurricane season. We've had multiple hurricanes, major hurricanes, even landfalling major hurricanes in strong El Nino years. This wave may or may not end up being that, but these are all reminders that we can't ignore these and write off the season.
Yeah, very, very good advice. Thank you, Dr. Knabb. Let's take a break. We'll come right back. I want to talk real fast a little bit about the Pacific when we come back. All right, welcome back, everybody. As we were talking about, the Pacific has been where we've seen a lot of activity so far this season, kind of typical for El Ninos. What are we thinking as we look ahead the next couple of weeks, Dr. Knabb?
The beat goes on. I mean, it's going to continue to be very busy in the Central and Eastern Pacific. Maybe not as busy closer to Mexico and Central America, because the same sort of things that are plaguing the Caribbean might be plaguing the far Eastern Pacific in terms of the sinking air and the wind shear. But we've had multiple storms interacting with one another. Tropical Storm Isel kind of absorbing what was Julio, but there's more in the pipeline. And incidentally, these areas to watch, where do they come from? Well, they're tropical waves that didn't develop in the Atlantic or Caribbean, and then they form in the Eastern Pacific. Most Eastern Pacific depression storms and hurricanes originate from the disturbances that are African easterly waves. And we still even have Lala way up there near the date line. So it's still a heads up period for the rest of this hurricane season for the state of Hawaii. They're a small target, but they're vulnerable in El Nino years, as we have already seen. And we've got more of these systems in the pipeline. You can just tell how much convection there is in the Central and Eastern Pacific, but you can kind of see why the Caribbean has a lot of shear, because you have all of this thunderstorm activity, and then what goes up then has to go out, and then the outflow kind of turns into the flow that goes underneath these upper lows, and then you get the shear at the upper levels going across the Caribbean. But watch how the storms keep forming in the Pacific. They weaken over cooler water, but here's another one behind it over the next week. And then Climate Prediction Center came out with their week 2 outlook. It starts a week from now, still high chances all the way from south of Cabo all the way to south of Hawaii. So in the Hawaiian Islands, I hope Lala was the only significant impact this year, but certainly can't guarantee that. And then the East Pacific stays busy. Now, they didn't highlight any areas on the Atlantic side, but they continue to highlight how the Caribbean is a place where not only wind shear, but sinking air. But that doesn't mean we can't have something form out in here and do this kind of thing. They just didn't have any really specific spots to focus in on for development chances for tropical cyclones. But I would not be shocked if we got something in the Atlantic over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the season, even late May and June, especially here in Florida, we're watching the Gulf and the Western Caribbean. And as we move through the seasons, we tend to start looking further and further east. Now we're actually out in the MDR, the main development region. But what about the Gulf? Because you were talking about in-close development, and just like you mentioned, Idalia, we still have to focus there. The water's warm.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons why we haven't seen something in the Gulf over the last few weeks is that it's just that the tropical waves have been moving through and leading to East Pacific development. And a lot of those storms that you can think of that were big, bad August events in the Gulf were systems that formed in the Caribbean and then moved up into the Gulf. Like Laura and like Idalia that we talked about a little bit ago, but it just hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean it can't. And the other thing is that the systems that stay out of the Caribbean have been big, big problems in El Nino years. So the other thing I would highlight is that if you think back what's been the case over the last 10 years or so, we've had very late loaded seasons, El Nino or not. Sometimes we're here in the middle or late August and going, where are all the storms? And then they start cranking up in September. And we've had more storms and hurricanes and major hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin in the last 10 years after September 15th than we have before September 15th. So we have a long way to go. It is only August, and we're not even to the peak of the Atlantic season, so a lot can still happen.
Yeah, and the peak is September 10th, statistically speaking, so after the 15th, you're talking more of it on the back half of the season.
Oh, yeah.
We will stay prepared. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise, Dr. Knabb. We really appreciate it. Keep up the good work for all your team up there at the Weather Channel. We'll talk to you next week.
I always enjoy talking with you. See you next time.
All right, welcome back. It's always great to talk to Dr. Knabb about the tropics. Let's look a little bit closer to home, shall we? We do have a couple of showers and thunderstorms out there on the map, but not a lot. Most of them are deep inland. You can see southeastern Polk County, Hardy, DeSoto, northern Highlands County especially. There's a couple up into Citrus County, and you see one or two right there along the Pasco-Hernando County line, but not a whole lot of rain out there. And I think we'll keep a small shower chance between now and about 8:30, 9 o'clock tonight. It's almost carbon copy what we saw yesterday, if not a little less coverage. And then we will be looking at another beautiful sunset out there. Temperature-wise, we have made the upper 80s and low 90s, but this is about as warm as we're going to get. We're already starting to come down just a little bit, and yeah, it's muggy. Obviously not going to do anything about that. All right, here we go through tonight. You can see, look at that. Really kind of a quiet night. Tomorrow morning, we'll start partly cloudy skies, isolated shower along the coast. Not a whole lot like what we saw yesterday, or this morning, I should say. And then as you can see, as we go through the mid-morning hours, there we go. All right, that's right around 12:30 to 1:30. We pop up those showers and storms in the daytime heating. That's 4 o'clock. They drift inland, and then they start to come back. Now, what will happen over the next couple of days is we will actually start to see a little bit better coverage altogether. And we're talking later in the afternoon, especially by the weekend into next week. But guys, that is a great looking 7-day forecast. We need the rain, and it's going to be pretty typical summertime rain here for the next week.